Hey, this is Sam Sanders, and I'm here to discuss the 1992 film Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola. So, this movie begins in the late 1400s with Lord Dracula, the Count, and he's fighting off this large Turkish invasion. And he's got this ancient wife named Elisabetta, who he loves dearly. Unfortunately, this battle looks like it's not going to go very well, so they expect that he might perish. Kind of by the grace of God, he is able to win, but in a moment of deceit, these Turks shoot an arrow over the wall with a letter saying that they've killed the Count. And Elisabetta is heartbroken and she jumps to her death in the river below the castle. Dracula comes back and he sees this and he is furious and he's heartbroken and he's unable to continue. So he takes this sword and he stabs the cross. And when he does that, he's cursed for eternal life. And from here, we go to probably Britain in the late 1800s with a real estate agent named Jonathan Harker. And Jonathan Harker is kind of this young up-and-coming real estate agent who also is balancing a marriage with this lady named Mina Murray, played by Winona Ryder, if you're so interested. And at this moment, it's looking like he's got to do this trip to kind of help Lord Dracula secure his property in England. But he also wants to get married. So he has to put the marriage on the back burner for a bit and travel to Transylvania to kind of help Dracula secure his finances because the previous real estate agent had gone insane. So, when he gets there, Dracula sees his picture of his wife and he thinks, oh my god, that's a beautiful woman. And it kind of looks like my ancient bride. So, when he sees this, it seems like Jonathan becomes imprisoned by these concubines who are kind of roaming the castle on account of Lord Dracula's wishes. And he travels to England to kind of view his real estate projects and look for his new bride. So while he's there, he kind of is walking along the streets and he sees Mina in the distance and the two kind of lock eyes and they have this very spontaneous and exciting relationship. And they start dating because she thinks that Jonathan has died at, this mysterious castle in Romania. But during this time, Jonathan is able to escape and eventually he's able to kind of reach this monastery and call for Mina to marry him. During this time, Dracula bites the friend of Mina, this kind of promiscuous young lady named Lucy, who has these three suitors who kind of become the muscle of this team that's assembling to fight Dracula. And during this time, the condition of Lucy starts to decay. And one of these suitors, who's a doctor, calls his mentor, Dr. Van Helsing, to come and view this dying lady and help her. And he astutely recognizes that this is something that a vampire has done, and he calls it Nosferatu, and that they have to account for this. So this group of Jonathan, Mina, these three suitors, and Van Helsing start looking for Dracula. During this time, Mina is still kind of deeply involved with the Count on kind of like a subconscious level. And while this ragtag group is destroying the property of Dracula, trying to find him, Dracula infiltrates the quarters of Mina. And the two have this discussion where she recognizes that he has killed Lucy, but she is also infatuated with him and clearly loves him very much. And she kind of says, you need to bite me so we can be together eternally, which he duly does. So once this happens, this team breaks in and they start shooting at him, but Dracula turns into a rat and escapes. Once this happens, he starts to flee to Romania and the crew lays chase. Mina is quickly becoming a vampire. And she still, even at that moment, is clearly infatuated with this prince she's met. Eventually, they they kind of intercept Count Dracula at the walls of his castle. And they have this firefight, and it ends with Mina holding up kind of this group of her theoretical teammates. And she decides she wants to be the one to cut the head off of Dracula because they kind of are in this romantic relationship. And she feels she is responsible. So she does, she decapitates him, and Dracula joins his ancient bride in heaven. Or hell, I don't know. And the afterlife. And kind of the key theme here is the idea of eternal love and eternal life. So, as a psychologist, I'd like to provide a few different points of advice for these characters. And I'll start with Dracula. The first thing he needs to work on is forgiveness and moving forward. He's clearly harboring a lot of resentment and a lot of hurt about something that happened 400 years ago, which isn't correct. And I think he needs to work on his coping mechanisms and kind of who he has in his castle to help balance his, negative energy and his depressed attitude. And clearly at this moment, he's got these concubines who are laying around, but they're not providing him with any substance. So I urge that maybe he either does away with these women or some way, or maybe ends their eternal life. My next advice is he needs to not be using eternal love as his kind of point of grading relationships on. I think it's a very unrealistic goal, and I think a lot of people right now kind of have a similar view on this. For instance, I think, now that people live into their 80s and 90s, people expect to have 60-year relationships, which just isn't realistic. I would urge the Count to maybe look for fun relationships, or maybe ones that are stimulating to him. And this moves on to my next point, where his relationship with Mina, I don't think will thrive in the kind of the eternal life category of relationships. They met in a very spontaneous, very lustful, and exciting relationship, and eternal life doesn't match with that. So I would urge those two's relationship. They should evaluate that and potentially think about staying in England and kind of enjoying young people life and kind of staying exciting. In Joe Piazza's book, How to Be Married, this is one of the key topics where, you want to keep an energized relationship. You don't want to turn your girlfriend necessarily into your wife of 70 years overnight. You kind of want to keep that energy, per se. My other advice for Lord Dracula is he needs to work on consent. He is always flying around and going into people's bed and biting them. I think that this is very harmful to people that he cares about, but also his own internal good. Clearly, this has kind of eroded his ethics, per se. And I think that this is something that he needs to end, and it gets him in a lot of hot water. The other advice I'd give him is if you have eternal life, do not brandish that on people. We get this real estate agent, Renfield, who is motivated by this promise of eternal life. But that is not realistic. And ultimately, he gives it to Mina, which frustrates Renfield because it feels like he's giving it to just some random women, which he has over his friends. So if you're going to promise eternal life, maybe you should deliver. All right, on to the next person, Jonathan. My advice to Jonathan, and this remembers the real estate agent from Britain, would be he needs to favor his relationships over his occupations, number one. And they talked about this in Joe Piazza's How to Be Married, where she says you don't want to put your occupation over a relationship if you want it to be successful. And I could not agree more. This issue starts because he wants to travel to Romania to secure his job. And that, even without supernatural influence, is a dangerous idea. So I would urge him to first look at his relationship, and maybe he could get married and then travel to Romania. But anyways, lock it down before you go. With that said, he also needs to reconsider his views on premarital sex. Clearly, Mina was very excited by the idea of the promiscuity of Lucy, her friend who's entertaining these suitors. And I think as a 20-year-old, that's very realistic. And I don't know the religious background of Jonathan, but I urge him to maybe kind of expand his views on that, if at all possible. Because clearly that would kind of keep the relationship more exciting and kind of bring in that spontaneity that she had with the Count, Lord Dracula. And for Mina, my advice to her would be potentially be more honest and, dare I say, monogamous. She has these two relationships with two men she cares about, yet she won't cut them off. And part of that's the supernatural influence, but I think she needs to be very honest with it. And that would have protected everyone involved. So that would be my advice to her, is kind of think about how her actions and her energy affects those around her. My final advice would be to Lucy, her friend. And I think, she's a very innocent character in this, but, she brandishes this kind of marriage over these suitors, and I don't think that's fair because clearly she's kind of pitting them against each other. Thankfully, these suitors have a very strong relationship based on their mutual care of Lucy, who's clearly this very popular character. And I think she owes it to these surrounding figures to be very honest, because even as she's dying, she's still seemingly seducing these characters. And I think that is actually the strongest relationship in this whole thing, is the power of friendship. And we see, these characters definitely continuing to fight for each other and die for each other based on the power of friendship. So I'd say that they need to continue working on that and foster those relationships, but also, rather than eternal life, look at entertaining, just enjoying your relationship and increasing the love you have for each other and the compassion. I don't think you want to ever grade a relationship on the possibility that it lasts forever. So that's my advice for these characters, and thank you for listening. I'm sure you would enjoy this movie if you watched it. I've already watched it 3 times. It's a very strange movie. Take care.